Anyways, hey everybody. Welcome to the next follow-up episode that we're having on behalf of our church, Resurrection South Austin. These episodes are meant to just follow up I think that's now what we're calling this because that's what makes sense, and so that's what we're calling it from now on. Following up from things that just happened at Res and things that deserve a little bit more conversation. So we have our director of family ministry here because what just happened on Sunday was our family service. So I want to talk with you about that. I want people to get a sense of who you are because you're fresh into this role too. Yeah. So I want people to get to know you, your philosophy of ministry, and why kids are so important. And then we thought just for fun, we would throw in some more controversial, not controversial because the church has spoken about it, but some spicy topics like infant baptism and things like that. So that's what we got planned for you today. We hope you can just grab a cup of coffee with us, sit back, relax, and enjoy our conversation. Cool. Melissa, it's good to have you.
Thanks.
To our new, this podcast has gone viral. So there are tens of thousands of people.
Tens of people.
No pressure. There are tens of people.
5 to tens of people.
Hey, listener. Like literally.
Ones.
Hey, honey, it's my wife. She listens.
Aww.
So tell us about yourself and what your background is, where you come from, and how you find yourself serving as the director of family ministry here at Res. Just give us some background.
Some background information. So I grew up outside of Atlanta, and when I graduated from college, I had a degree in early childhood education, but I couldn't find a job in the school's teaching. So I actually ended up working for a church for their 5th and 6th grade ministry department for a year. And then I ended up working with a church plant as their children's director for a few years alongside being a elementary school teacher until I just couldn't do both of those things at the same time.
And then you went into a whole career of elementary school teaching.
Yeah.
And how long were you doing that?
I did that for 12 years.
Goodness.
I worked in education for 12, almost 13 years, and did a little graduate school stint at UT in there.
Oh, okay.
As well. That's what brought us to Austin, was me in graduate school.
Okay. And you were a teacher during the pandemic.
I was,
which
yes.
is its own sort of merit badge, right? Or it's like a thing, I imagine. When we were going through the pandemic with all 6 of our kids at home, we were thinking, dear Lord, how do teachers do this typically when we only have 6, but you guys have like 25, 30 at times. Mm-hmm. And then in the pandemic going all at home, have you processed this fully? Do you guys see counselors and therapists? And
we wish. I think that I know that the pandemic was a turning point in education. It changed education forever.
It forced all of us into using tech in good ways. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are a million other things, but that just seems like a harrowing moment in a career of a school teacher.
Yes. And things were completely different pre-pandemic in the classroom and post-pandemic in the classroom. So it really changed how everything worked.
And I would say the same in the church, actually, right? Like we were forced online. We probably wouldn't be sitting here doing this.
For sure.
Without just being thrown into the deep end of technology. So this is actually sort of an interesting topic, kids and technology and like screens and how we are so early on in the age of development with this kind of advanced technology where computers are in our pockets, right? Let alone our kids having access to these things. I know that for parents, technology and how much time they spend in front of technology is a real concern. Mm-hmm. And not only I know developmentally with like how a child's brain, we weren't prepared to talk about this, but it's right here. Let's talk about it.
It's the rabbit hole.
How a child's brain develops, but also just the habits that creates with kids in terms of entertainment, and the kinds of people that children become with those kinds of habits. Mm-hmm. These are we don't have answers to these things. We're still learning. But I think there's a few things that could be said in this space. I'm curious what comes to mind for you, but I'll jump in first. One is there's always there's serious reason. There's legitimate reason to be concerned about how this is affecting our kids and us.
Yeah.
By the way. And at the same time, there can very easily been and has always been with major advances in technology, a real appetite for fear or an inclination to overreact and say it's video games that are destroying our youth. Meanwhile, we as adults are creating a society that is doing far more harm to them than video games ever would, right?
Yeah.
But we like to blame Hollywood and video games.
For sure.
Everybody else but us.
Yes.
As a teacher who's experienced technology, as a mother, as now a director of family, how do you think through technology, and how does that shape even the classroom on Sunday? Like, I've been in there. You guys, you use certain kinds of technology, but like, tell us about that. What's your approach to that? Do you have any? Am I putting you on the spot?
No, it's fine. So I think that technology is good and can be bad, but I think it's 100% the way it's used and the person. I also have a positive view of video games. Graduate school kind of changed my viewpoints.
And let's be honest.
And my husband plays video games.
I was going to say, the most well-researched person on the goods of video gaming, Alex Gray, my man.
Alex Gray loves video games, and he's an adult.
And it's awesome.
Yeah.
His video games are sweet. I played them.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great way for him to escape. He's able to be a critical thinker, creative. For people who like to play games with others, it's a way for you to... I mean, during the pandemic, Alex and I played video games with our friends who lived in Atlanta.
Right.
So
My son did the same thing. We did. I mean, we got online.
Right.
We all used it in different ways, right?
Right. So it's a community. There's a lot of literacies that happen in video games with reading and typing and writing. And I mean, there's just so many with kids, like plot and problem and solution and all of that with that you can find in video games if you really are paying attention to what's happening and noticing. So I think that we sometimes as humans have a tendency, like you said, to be very fear-based and like, these are awful. I'm never going to let my kids play video games.
While they're on Wordle and Words with Friends.
Right. Or on Instagram and...
We know people.
Yeah. So...
And it's the same sort of phenomenon that maybe this is... Some scholars who did their PhD in this is gonna email us, and that's great because then they're listening. There's 2 listeners.
11 listeners.
11 listeners. They're gonna say, "Oh, here's my thing." I think of the printing press.
Yeah.
And how that technology changed the planet, societies at large, the course of human history, even the course of religious history. Now, where people could have a printed Bible in their own language at home, that was unheard of. And how books, even our prayer books, are a technology.
Yeah.
Actually, we don't think of it like that because it's so old, but it's a technology that we have, and we're saying, don't get stuck on tech. Go read a book. There's an irony there because they're both technologies.
Right.
It's just sort of like, and any of those technologies could be overdone, overused, abused, right? And so we're looking for not only just moderation in general, but I think what's far more interesting is how these technologies are forming us, the kinds of people we're becoming with the use of these technologies. I had a friend who on his laptop had a sticky that said, "This is a tool, don't be a tool." And I always remember that, when we sit down to use these things, this is the kind of thing that we want to model to our kids. It's like, hey, don't be mastered by this screen. Use it as a tool or as a game, but it has a place and it doesn't need to overtake your life. Yeah. Which is sort of what we're trying to be careful with, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, back to, this is nowhere on anything we prepared for, but this is the fun of this podcast. So tell us about, let's skip over and move to just child formation. And I just want to get you talking so that our church gets a sense, our 11 listeners get a sense of what's in your mind as you approach forming children in the way of Christ.
For sure. So something I really like to think about is how can we prepare kids to be a part of our church community, number one, because we want them to be lifelong church people. I mean, that's our hope, is that they will grow in the church and then continue in the church as adults. So teaching them what it looks like to be a part of a church community, serve in a church community, participate in a church community. And for our church in particular, that looks like experiencing the liturgy, which is why I have put the liturgy into their lessons so that they are experiencing it in the classroom as well as experiencing it when they come into the church service.
So there's like consistency. It's not as sort of in churches that I grew up in, it's not like Disneyland in the basement
Right.
of the church and then boring big church.
Right.
Or whatever.
Well, because we saw that when that happened, now that our generation has grown up, big churches in a lot of places are not boring anymore. They look like those little kid services.
Now it's Disneyland on the main floor.
For sure, with adults.
A TED Talk and, an ACL or
Yeah.
South by Southwest.
Yeah. So like the kids that were formed in that way grew up to then expect that to happen in what we call big church.
And again, it's interesting, maybe this is going to keep coming up, but the way that technology plays a role in this, because like in all this, we don't mean, and I hope you guys don't hear us condemning like a band or amplification or even the use of lights and like a 45-minute sermon, fog machines. We've seen it. We don't have a beef with that. But if Ryan Flanagan, our director of music, was here, he probably has a far more sophisticated critique of this than I'm prepared to give right now. But I think he would say he would point us in the direction of, again, how is this technology? How are we using this space? How is the room and the lyrics we're singing and all of these tools, sensory, experiential human things? What kinds of people are we becoming when we use them this way? And so what I hear you saying is that we're concerned with forming our children not only in a way that is consistent with the way the greater church worships when they come into the larger sanctuary, right, at the peace, but also with the way that the church has always worshiped in some way.
Right.
There's a global perspective, a historic perspective. And there is also a wisdom in liturgical formation, the things that the liturgy does to us as we inhabit it again and again and again. The words and the songs and the use of our bodies and the way we use time and every bit that we do, the things we see and smell, it has an impact on us. And so that impact, which is, I think, really comprehensive. I love it because it addresses human beings not as just brains on sticks, but whole human beings, right? Body and soul. And it forms us really deeply in scriptures and the prayers and all of that, like Christian imagination. And that you're doing in the kids' classroom as much as possible as well.
Yes.
So there's like a consistent formation. But then there's also, I imagine, a fluency. So when kids come into this space, and I know you have stories about this, there's all these things to do or touch or smell or experience.
Yeah.
They're learning how to do this in the classroom.
Yes.
Tell us about that. And tell us a story, because I know you've got stories
Yeah.
about this.
So, for instance, we do the water, where they dip their fingers in the water
In the
baptismal font.
Yeah.
And we have a little baby bowl that is our baptismal font, and we use holy water, real legit holy water from the sacristy. And so that is like the most favorite part in the nursery, but also with the older kids too, but especially in the nursery, to dip their fingers in the water. And it's really sweet to see, after doing that for maybe a week or two, I saw kids when they walked into the sanctuary dipping their fingers into the baptismal font.
I know what that is.
Yeah. And they knew what to do, even if they were just like sweet, some of those sweet ones.
I saw one do it yesterday like this on the forehead, on their right cheek, on their left cheek. I'm like, that works.
They do.
On their mouth.
They'll just like keep dipping their hands in, and they'll just have like water dripping down their face. But it's great.
It's so great. So
it's awesome.
When kids don't do it right, why do you say it's great?
Well, because they're growing and they're learning and they're experiencing, and we don't want them to feel like they're doing something wrong or they have to do it in a certain way.
Right.
The whole point of that is to like remember your baptism and put the water on your forehead. Like, who cares if they do the cross in their two?
They'll get it eventually.
Yeah, at some point they'll get it.
The point is, if they're wondering about baptism, wonder is a great word, right?
Yes.
These opportunities to just look, the motions will come. And even there, I've heard people say like, well, I don't want my kids or myself to go through the motions and they say it sort of with a negative connotation without understanding what those motions mean. And I would say to that, like that's impossible.
Right.
There's so many motions that you don't understand that you go through. And not that you should, not try to understand them. Of course, go and understand them. But it's also okay to go through the motions and wonder about what those motions mean.
Yeah.
And I think you find our kids doing this
For
all
sure.
the time. And this is why I think, especially with my kids, they'll be going through a motion, and then at the dinner table when we'll talk about like a story about Jesus or something, what's really cool is I can say, hey, you know that one thing we do in church all the time? That thing, you've been doing this, you know that? Well, this is what that means. And it's, you can see like the light bulbs come on, like the connections being made. So, but you don't get that unless you put your kids into all the motions.
Yeah.
That make it available as a teaching tool later to
For
unpack.
sure. Yeah. Especially if it's abstract, because developmentally, they might not be able to put those two pieces together until later.
Give me an example.
Later.
What do you mean by that?
So, I don't know. I'm thinking.
Like the forgiveness of sins is sort of abstract.
It is. Or God.
Right.
The idea of God is really abstract because they can't feel, touch, physically see God. Mm-hmm. And even Jesus, they can't see physically Jesus. The Holy Spirit is an even bigger one, because at least Jesus has skin on at some point, and there's pictures of Jesus.
Right.
The Holy Spirit is just very mysterious. There's just and so we can't like pinpoint that. It's abstract to them, but the more we allow them to ask questions and think about it and allow it to be mysterious, I think is really important too. And not making everything concrete for them.
So this is, I think, a pro tip for parents, right? Because I know every parent has been put on the spot by their kids with some incredible question.
Yeah.
I got kids in my neighborhood that I know their parents send them to me because they're in our church. One of the kids came over and was like, I think I had just walked in the door from church, and they were there and she was there, and she said, "Hi, Mr. Shawn," because that's what the neighborhood kids call me. "Hi, Mr. Shawn. How do you know God exists if you've never seen him?" I just walked in the door. I'm like, come on, get out of my house. No, I didn't. But in those moments, to be able to say, like, this is a pro tip, y'all. Wow, that's a really incredible question. Like, whoa. Take in the question. Take in the wonder. Mm-hmm. In a way, like, signal to the child, I see what you're saying. Wow, I got to sit with that. That's a big one. I think appreciating the question as coming from a place of wonder, where you can tell they're trying to connect some dots, is so validating for kids.
Yeah.
Because they go like, oh, I'm on to something. Like, oh, I'm smart. I'm like, and this question I have is valued. Mm. My parents or these other adults in my life in the faith are going, whoa, yeah, that's something, isn't it? Without giving quick sort of one-line answers that maybe we feel like, I'm not even sure I believe that, right? And then even maybe you do have a good answer for that. We talked and we had a decent conversation, but sometimes it's okay also to with your kids to say, I'm not really sure. Mm. I believe in God. I know he exists. How do I know that if I can't see him? Wow. I have to think about that and get back to you. And again, I think as parents, we're afraid, oh, great, now our kids are going to have doubts and they're going to not believe anything we say. I would say actually quite the opposite. They will see modeled in their parents or in their adults in their life an approach to doing theology that's really curious and actually kind of fun and honest. It's like transparent.
Sure. Yeah.
As opposed to having a sort of aversion to doubts. Mm. There's an anxiety that we sort of accidentally give to our kids or signal to our kids, and we're like, oh, don't ask those questions. Don't have, I don't know, I will find out. So don't, you sort of signal this anxiety, and kids go, I think they learn early on, like, oh, we shouldn't ask questions. Mm. There are certain things that are off limits. Yeah. They make mom and dad really nervous. So there's some pro tips in my own experience going, wow, that's a great question. And I don't know.
Right.
let me get back to you.
For sure. Or like, hey, let's look at this together. Or saying things like, well, and I did this in the 3rd through 5th grade class when we were talking about the Apostles' Creed and Jesus descending into hell. And I had a conversation with them, like, some people believe that he descended into hell because of this verse in Ezekiel. Some people believe that he didn't descend into hell. And so I gave them that, like, I didn't give them a concrete answer about what it was. And I think that's also important too, within reason, to allow kids to think about and ask questions, especially when they're under your roof as a parent, because they're gonna wonder and they're gonna ask questions when they're a young adult or even a middle-aged adult. And how great is it that they can do that with you under their roof?
Totally. And even, again, disagreeing.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's okay.
Yeah.
And we're still together. Like, what an important, can you imagine a church full of adults who have been well formed in the church over disagreement?
Right.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
And so to model to kids, hey, some people believe, again, within things that are reasonable. I mean, you have the creed to lean on here with the Apostles' Creed. So, like, some people don't believe the creed's really right about this, but it's the creed. So you're going to need to get over yourself and read
some
1
people,
Peter.
And some people take out
3.
the creed, like take out part of the creed, which is kind of an interesting idea that some people are like, I don't agree with this, so I'm going to take it out.
Right. They try to,
Which is like something to talk about with kids.
Totally.
We can't just do that.
You don't get to like make the faith in your own image, as people say. And so there's also, like, on the one hand, I'm hearing you say there's place for wonder, questions, doubt, and there's sort of an adventure in discovering God through your own sorting and questions and communication, like conversations with people in the community. So it's not just a private faith, but it's a communal faith that you're working out with fear and trembling, right, as we sort of live it out following Jesus. And on the other hand, there's the gift of what has been given. So I'm thinking, because I think sometimes Christians can really camp out in that space of everything's up for grabs and like question anything, and like, sure, go for it, whatever. But the problem with that isn't the doubting or the conversation. The problem with that is it neglects what has already been given. In the faith, and in the person of Jesus, and in the church, in the early church especially, in the creeds that we're teaching, and in Holy Scripture, and all of this inheritance of faith that we did not make on our own, but has been given to us in love, can be received really well too. And looking not like, well, I must believe this or I'm going to hell, but while this gift is hard to understand at times, and I don't have to understand it in order to receive it in faith. And so it creates this restful place to trust your family, to trust your community, and trust your tradition. And while you're sorting things out, to be able to be in a place of rest, saying, God, you in your Spirit have throughout history worked out a way of revealing something about who you are that I can receive as a gift, and then unpack the rest of my life.
Right.
So we need sort of both, I guess is what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And you're putting some of those pieces in place in our children's formation, our classrooms and stuff like that. So tell me about, like, how does it go? Is there certain things that you approach with family ministry in terms of ages? Like, I imagine you have to start somewhere with babies who, don't even speak English or whatever, but do get things, right?
Right.
And then moving up through, like, middle school and high schoolers, they're also doing different work too. Like, we just gave some awards, for instance.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Right. So I think with babies and littles, it's all about play, experience, wonder, and just presenting. And adding in some little nuggets of teaching, especially with the and repetitiveness over and over and over again. which is what we do every Sunday with when we experience all the different parts of the liturgy. It's very repetitive, and it's how we learn and memorize. And so the same thing is happening in the little kid class, but they're also touching things and experiencing it and playing. But yeah, playing. And then I'm thinking about the early elementary class. There's a little more instruction that happens, but there's still that repetitiveness, and there's still a little bit of play and experience happening in that room. Then we move up to 3rd through 5th grade, a little bit more instruction, but then also I think, and in middle school too, I'm thinking about Courtney, how when she taught the middle school class,
Right.
she and I talked a lot about how important it was for us to spend time forming a community with these kids, to help them get to know each other a little bit better and build friendships. So we made a point to incorporate that in what we were doing, which happens in the younger kids' classes because there's play.
Right.
And toys.
And everybody's a friend.
Right.
Yeah.
But then once you move up into the older kids, it has to be a little bit more intentional, the building of community, which we want and which we do with adults too, with table groups. I mean, that's what table groups are
Right.
for, to help build community.
Like a deeper community. We're not just like play community, but now I have friends at church.
Right.
Which is not sort of a footnote. That is a major part of like, especially at junior high, when you're figuring out, like I was the most awkward junior higher. I was totally out of touch with how the rest of the world saw me. So I was just looking back, I could see it. Now I'm like, oh, that's why my parents and my sister were saying like, dude, like, how about you cut your 2-inch spikes? How about that for an idea? And I was like, no, I like these spikes. I don't know what. Anyways. And so we're like sorting out our identity as junior hires and trying to figure out like who we are and where we fit in the world. And so to have a community at the church where you know you belong. Right. And not merely because you have friends, but because also you do have friends, right? You are loved. But also, and we're going to get to this in a minute, but because you were baptized, because God said so. And the whole church celebrated your welcome into the church. And so you belong objectively, regardless of what people say or think or any of opinions. There's sort of an objective, solid foundation for kids to experience belonging. Right. And so friendships have got to be a significant part of how that works out, even in the classroom. Right. And so I'm hearing like sort of play and concrete, visible, simple concepts. And then as they progress, the relationships feature more and really grow in deeper ways, in different ways. And then more abstract concepts, thoughts about our faith. Is that how it goes? Yeah.
And I was thinking alongside that, in the little kids classes, it's a lot of stories. It's very story driven. Like, let's really talk about what these Bible stories are and lay the foundation to see the Bible as a story, which is why we love the Jesus Storybook Bible, because it paints that for us. And then as they get a little bit older, we get a little bit more abstract, allowing them to ask more questions. And we dive in deeper and spend time, talking about the Bible stories, but also spend time talking about the pillars of our faith, like the Apostles' Creed, the 10 Commandments, the Lord's Prayer. Why are those important? The prayer book. That kind of stuff happens as we gradually get older in age.
I imagine people hearing this are thinking, man, I wish I could be in the class. Like, these are things I should study, right?
I learned so much when I studied the Apostles' Creed to teach about it with kids. Say this.
So what would you say to these people who are like, man, I need to be formed in this way? Is there a way for adults to be in the classroom?
Why, yes, there is. They can volunteer. And I've written the lessons for them. So it's like the work is done. The work is it's done for you already. And it's on an iPad, speaking of technology. Yeah. So you also don't have to sing the songs a cappella.
I think
unless you want to. Okay. Unless you want to, you can click the button and the YouTube pops up. This is a funny aside. Yeah. So I was in the kids class. Was it last week, no, 2 weeks ago with Brooke Foltz, and she was teaching the early elementary lesson. And I have it so when you click the YouTube link, my personal, like my YouTube account is signed in, so it won't show commercials.
Oh,
but
nice.
something happened. And so when she clicked on the song link, it was a commercial for like someone having a hard time pooping.
Oh, good. The kids are like, I can relate to that.
We lost everybody because
no.
it was like 5-year-olds through second graders.
Oh, no.
So I don't know if that
We'll have to work on that.
they came home with that story. It's good news that your
We'll
girls
get our IT on that right
didn't
away.
come home with that story. But I told her when it happened, we all just lost it. Even Brooke, we just had a moment
Of course, that
of
happens
complete
to Brooke too. Poor Brooke. I'm not sure that's really. You're not really selling volunteering to people really well.
But it's fixed now. Like it's not going to happen again. We fixed
totally
it.
trust you.
But
So what could someone like if they're like, okay, I'm not sure, like the concerns about volunteering. I don't want to volunteer every week.
oh yeah, I get that.
I don't want to even volunteer like every other week. I just want to have a healthy rhythm of volunteering, maybe like once a month or once a quarter.
Yeah.
Is that something that you can accommodate? How do you do that? How do you schedule people?
Yeah. So I work really hard at only having our volunteers serve once a month.
Okay.
And if for some reason we don't have enough volunteers, I'm not going to ask people to serve more than once a month. We will just cancel the kids' classes, or combine the kids' classes, or I'll jump in one week if I need to.
What if they're like, look, I hate infants, but I love middle schoolers?
For sure. So
I mean, there are ways.
oh yeah, there are ways to, like, when people sign up, they tell me.
And who doesn't like, if you don't like infants?
I know, they're so fun.
Come tell me. We need to talk. I'll get an email from Alex like, well.
I don't like infants.
No. So you place them with an age that they feel comfortable with.
Right.
You're preparing them with curriculum. You're scheduling them in ways that work for their schedules. They can even block out dates that are unavailable.
Oh, yeah.
So we really try to accommodate volunteers. So that's easy. Why is it so important that why not just like hire a whole bunch of people to do this for us? Why is it important that adults in our community are volunteering to serve? What about that is, I'm trying to tee this up.
Yeah.
What about that is like expressing something about our faith in Christ?
Yeah.
And the
lights
just
just went out.
We're in the background. There we go. I'm not going to set that up again. But what about
It's fine.
that? What about that is like our living our faith out?
Yeah.
Like something that people should feel compelled, just because like I love Jesus and I want to be his disciple and I want to obey his commandments and like walk in his way. Mm-hmm. How does serving kids fall into that?
Well, you're fulfilling your baptismal the vows that you make.
Boom, mic drop.
When we do our baptismal services,
Yeah.
you vow to bring these kids in as a part of the family and help raise them up in our community and our church within the Spirit.
Right. The priest says to the whole church, will you do everything in your power to support these children, these baptismal candidates in their life in Christ? And the church says, we will.
Yeah. And
Right.
that
So there's a way.
means serving and teaching in the classroom. I think it's about building relationships too. I mean, one of the things I remember, I'm going to call out James Walpole has said this.
My man.
He has said when he serves in kids, he just feels like he's gained relationships with kids, but also with adults, with their parents. He's getting to know people that he might otherwise have not gotten to know because he's teaching their kids in the classroom and he's able to talk to them about their kids.
Right.
And so building a relationship that way is really important.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's really cool. Have you ever had that experience? Well, maybe you haven't yet because Winston's not quite conversational yet. But I'm sure people have had that experience where you're telling someone in your family something for years, and then they hear that thing from someone else, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, and they come home like, oh, this person said this, and I thought, wow, that's incredible. Never thought about that way. And you're sitting there going, I've been saying this to you for years.
Yeah.
So there's also sort of the role of a community in various voices that are not yours, speaking into our kids' lives.
Right.
So I got 6 kids and they're at the church. I love it when they get to hear from other adults at the church, speak into their lives. And I can't tell you how many times this has happened. And every time I have this experience or this thought, this is the way the Spirit works. This is the way the Spirit works, because it's only a God who cares for these kids, speaking through the community, all these various voices in these powerful ways that fill them with the joy of the Lord, and like raise them in certain ways. And they get to hear things like, wow, I'm good at this, or wow, that was a great question, or I've never thought about it like that. So the diversity and just the community itself existing and serving our kids and getting to know them and speaking into their lives is like, it's incredible. That's
Right.
the gift.
Right.
So if people are wondering, I wonder what my purpose in life is, or what God's calling me to do, or I wonder how I can like find my place as a Christian in this world, I would say start with your local church. Start here with the people in front of you. Oh man, I really want to like reach out to the neighborhood and I want to participate with God in his mission in the world to do something awesome.
Right.
Start with our kids.
Oh, yeah.
The neighborhood put into our church, to our lap, and God saying, here's a human being.
Yeah.
Like witness to them, show them the love of God, to be missional, and it be something that only happens outside the doors of the church while neglecting the children that God has given us is sort of backwards.
Yeah.
Right. We're overlooking them. And so if you're like wondering about what you're called to do or wanting to participate with God in his mission, this is a fantastic way, in such a critical way, I should say. It's not just an extracurricular, but it's like, it's something that we, as these kids, parents and adults in their life, we're actually called to, responsible for, that, and we will actually be judged if we don't do this well, and rightly so.
Yeah.
So like, we got to take care of our kids. One more thing before we get off of this that I want to address is safeguarding.
Oh, yeah.
Safe church. What does that look like for, not just any adult gets to be around our kids? Like, how does that work, and how do we keep track of that?
Yeah. So every adult that volunteers will complete a background check, and then they also will complete a safe ministry. Right now, we're using a program called Ministry Safe, and it's a training on how to interact with kids safely, but also how to recognize if a child might have some abuse happening at home or in other areas of their life.
And
so it's both and.
Right, and all the clergy, all the staff take this annually, and it's also helping to recognize unsafe situations developing long before they get there too. So we're all competent in being like watchdogs and noticing these things and setting up really safe environments. Right. So that isn't the thing that's interfering with the work that the church has, but we create these really safe places for adults and for kids, right? To do this work of discipleship and formation. Right. That's the idea.
Yeah. And we make sure that we have a certain number of adults with a certain number of kids. There's never one adult in a room with a bunch of children, even one adult and a youth worker and a youth volunteer with a bunch of kids. That will never happen. You'll never see spouses serving in the same room together unless there's also another adult there with them that's outside of their family.
It's really extensive and really thoughtful, right? This is built on like nationwide and historic best practices. Yeah. So it's really, really good. We commend that to, and require it, actually more than commend, we require it by all of the people that are in contact with any of our children, right? Cool. I want to ask sort of in general, like, what is it that family ministry at Resurrection South Austin, what is it that you need? If you could speak to all 11 listeners, no, the whole church is listening. If you could speak to our res people and just convey your heart, like, what is it that you need them to hear, and maybe invitations that you could extend to them to contribute to this church-wide work?
Yeah. We need volunteers. We need consistent volunteers. And we need consistent family attendance. I mean, man, it's so important.
That's a good point.
For your kids to be, and for you as a family to be in church to be in our church as much as you can, because that's what's going to help build that community and lay the foundation for your kids and your family to grow.
Especially if it's like once a week. And then even if you just miss a week, which is reasonable, but even when you miss a week, there's a disruption in that rhythm, that exposure and that formation. And then they're sort of, we'll catch our kids up and we don't need to be alarmed.
Right.
But every week matters.
Yeah.
Especially for our kids.
It does. And the lessons and the things that they're learning are building on each other. And so when they miss, there's some gaps, which again, you don't have to be anxious about it, but that is something that people can do is come to church
regularly. And as rector, I would also say something under the hood with family ministry is, of course, your regular attendance, but also your regular giving.
Oh yeah.
People don't realize that the amount of funding that goes into the supplies, the training, the coordination, all of the tools that we use to organize volunteers, to create set up and create classrooms. For you as the director to say, we need this thing, and then to be able to just get it.
Oh yeah, that's amazing.
Is a
especially
gift.
Coming from public education.
Totally, right?
I'm not having to buy my own supplies.
It's amazing. And that gift, the fact that you can just go and get that for the sake of these kids, people can be a part of that gift.
Yeah.
In their giving, they become a part of that giving. And so this is there's so many ways to get involved here, whether it's directly involved serving as a volunteer regularly, or in being present with your kids and showing up regularly. And on top of that, giving generously.
Yeah.
Whatever you can to help fund this really good ministry.
Yeah. Well, and I would also add one more thing, having conversations with your kids at home.
Yeah.
About what's happening in church.
Yeah, why is that important for you?
Well, we're really strategic at that. I really try to mimic what is being taught in the sermon in the classroom. Whether it's the same verses that whoever is preaching, the kids are getting teaching on, because we want the family to all be hearing a similar message. So then you can go home and continue to talk about it and even continue to build on it. And have these conversations, because we want to come alongside you as parents in the church. We don't want to be there. This is the only place that you can get spiritual formation is within the church. We want kids to see that it's also happening at home, and you can do this on your own.
So I'm hearing you say that the vision for family ministry here is not just to outsource your kids to the pros, the religious people, right? But really family ministry at Resurrection is to not only teach our kids, but support their parents and really all of the spiritual parents in the church to be the kinds of people who can contribute to the faith of these kids.
Yes.
And throughout the week. So it made me think in our own home, we're not shining examples of this. Let's keep it real. We're busy, we're tired.
Yeah.
Our kids, they're loud and they're messy. And I think oftentimes people hear encouragement to teach their kids the faith at home. They hear that in the context of just the chaos of their own life, right? And they think, yeah, right. So as someone who has 6 kids who knows how that feels, and I'm a priest, dang it, I'm supposed to be really good at this, right? So as one of those people, I want to share that there's certain ways to do this that can be fun and easy and low hanging fruit, and you don't have to be a pro.
Right.
So some of the ways that I've found to do this, and I'm curious if you have other ideas, Melissa, but one of the things that we've done is, number one, start by praying regularly at dinner. Mm-hmm. That's maybe seems wow, of course we do that. We're dishing out food it's a real kitchen, not a fancy restaurant, but more of a fast food sort of joint. We're dishing things out. I'm doing dishes. We're cooking. and it can be really easy to overlook the importance of pausing and praying. So one of the things we do in our house is we'll rotate and say, okay, whose turn is it to pray? And usually the little ones are timid, and we'll say, and then what's cool is the other kids will say like, hey, it's not, you don't have to be afraid. It's really easy. It goes like this, and they'll model it. So we're out of the mix and they're teaching, and we'll encourage them, and we won't pressure them if they don't want to do it. Okay, who's next? We'll come back to them. And over time, our little ones get to a place where they are able to eke out a prayer of some sort, and it's always super cute. So we'll rotate in praying, and that's cool because it teaches our kids to pray, and in a room with other people too, which can be intimidating. I'll also say with this, there are prayers in the prayer book called for this Grace at Meals that has significantly even shaped the way I pray for food.
Right. We all need models.
We all need models.
Somebody taught us how to pray.
Right. So in your prayer book, there's Grace at Meals. One of my favorites is it thanks God for this food and asks God to make us mindful of the needs of others, which is sort of a surprising thing to show up in a dinner prayer.
Right.
But I really love, and again, that's a little plug for the prayer book, how it teaches us to pray in ways we didn't expect to pray. It's such a good tool. So you can look back in the back of the prayer book in prayers and Thanksgivings. There's some prayers for that. They're like one sentence. They're super easy for kids. You could print that on a piece of paper or write it down. And you can say, hey, you could try praying this. This is easy. So that's one way. Another thing that's personally really fun, especially with more like elementary kids and younger, well, I mean, our middle schoolers and high schoolers like it too, is to tell stories about Jesus or from the Bible without sort of off the top of your head. Yeah. Like an oral tradition. And because there's something that happens when you're just reading it off the page that kids kind of roll their eyes or like check out or something. It can be. And that's necessary. That's still important. But say it off the top of your head as you remember it. I remember one time talking about the story and my kids were like, tell the story. They've heard it before and they want me to tell it again. So tell the story about the time Jesus healed the blind man. And they're talking about the occasion in which he spit into the dirt and wiped mud on his eyes. And so I would get like a jar of peanut butter and do it, but like enact it out and tell the story again. And they like lose their minds over that. It was so fun and interesting and ridiculous. And then there's other times where you can tell stories that are maybe more serious, but relate maybe to something that's going on in the world. But the point is to sort of get comfortable telling those stories at the dinner table. And what you'll find is, hopefully, is that your kids internalize that. And then you're also modeling to them what it looks like to tell the story. Yeah. And so eventually some of our other kids will tell the story at the dinner table. I remember when Madison was young and she was asking like, so the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are all God? Is there three gods? And Mateo jumps in, smart little Mateo, and he's like, oh, Maddie, it's called the Holy Trinity. And it's three persons and one God. And like, it just goes on. He's like, it's so kind of like simple. This. Yeah, it's so simple. And Michelle and I are sitting back going, where did that come from? But even getting your kids to sort of jump in and answer questions and tell stories those are simple ways. They don't take a ton of preparation. Right. Anyways, what do you think? I mean, is there anything else that parents that come to mind for you of like how parents can approach things throughout the week at home?
I mean, I think having conversations in the car. Yeah. Especially since what you heard during the service is very similar to what the kids heard in their classrooms.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So you can have conversations, even having a conversation with the older kids in your house or your partner about what they heard during the church service. Your littles are listening.
They're listening.
Yeah. So doing that in front of them. And then I think there could be seasons of more intense practices. So Advent, for example, could be the season that you have more of an intense and structured practice that you might do. And I think that makes things a little bit easier because you can say, oh, this is for a month. We're going to get into this this is a tradition. We all have traditions.
Yeah. And our kids love those. Like,
Right.
let me light the candle.
For sure.
Read the passage and pray the prayer.
Yeah, and so just finding rhythms and finding spaces, which we as a ministry will be working to come alongside you and providing you materials so you don't have to go and find it out on your own. But those are the kinds of things that you can do at home with your family.
And thinking of Christmas coming up, there's like little traditions that you can have, like open up the Bible to Luke chapter 2 and read the Christmas story before you open presents. Is something that we do. And so these sort of things put in the rhythms and the traditions of the family. These are ways to really easily just build in like moments of formation for your kids. And those seem like pretty easy, simple things to do. Like anybody could do that, right? Okay, lastly, one thing I want to just also mention about just your vision for family ministry and it not being something that we just outsource our children's formations to these experts, right? Why, obviously we want the community to be involved, but why are the kids so important to the life of the church? And we're not just sending them out, classrooms so we can worship in peace and quiet. But if you've ever stepped foot in our church, you notice there's like kids laying in the aisle, kids crying, there's like spilled things, there's, sometimes can be a little noisy, but we are all sort of like grateful that they're there and we roll with it. Why are we just nice people, or is there more behind our involvement and inclusion of children, especially thinking of what just happened this last Sunday?
Yeah. So we really want our kids to number one, feel like our church is their community. And so there are no spaces off limits to them. And so a way that you grow and can be a part of a community is by participating or volunteering, which is why the family service was so important, because we wanted kids to be able to see, oh, I can be a reader. And that's something that a kid can do any Sunday morning.
But it may not occur to them.
Right. It might not be something that they think I can do because they only see adults up there getting up to read on Sundays. I can sing on Sunday mornings, because we do in the classrooms, we go through and we sing a lot of the songs. Like we sing the Gloria and
the Sanctus
and all
sometimes the Lord's Prayer or whatever, right?
Yeah. And so then these kids can also be incorporated and be a part of a church service as well. And we really want these kids to grow up knowing that church is a safe place and a community for them, that if they ever leave the church, the Big C church as a whole, they can always come back. Like I want these kids, no matter how they feel, no matter how they question their faith, that they can always come back and be a part of the church community.
They belong. They have a place.
Yeah.
No matter what they go through in their life, that they can return home to.
Right. We want them to feel safe and welcome. And so we work really hard that's why one of the reasons that we don't mind kids being loud in the service, because we want them to feel welcome, and they're kids.
Right.
And we're going to let them be kids. Like, we don't have the expectation that a 2-year-old is not going to get squirmy and wiggly, because that's just the way they are. And it's okay. And that also, I think, can alleviate parents' anxieties too, of just like, this is not about you. This is he or she are kids.
Right.
They're going to be wiggly and loud, and they're going to make noise.
When I was a kid, my dad was a preacher, still is a Methodist preacher. I'd fall asleep on my sister's lap in the front row, I remember my dad coming home from church one day and saying, "What'd you think of the sermon?" Which he didn't ask frequently, but I remember for some reason this one time where I was sitting in the balcony and I had a tally of words like "the" and "Jesus," and I would mark them every time he said them. And I said, "Dad, you said Jesus 57 times or something like that." And that was what I got. He looked at me like, "That's what you got from my sermon." But there wasn't ever a sort of a scolding harshness about my parents that made me feel like, especially looking back, like, oh yeah, I was like an immature kid. I was trying to figure out how to be in church, and that's not the most sometimes exciting thing. And there's a way to learn to be in that space,
Right.
and to feel the love of people around you when you're growing into the kind of person that can be in that space,
Yeah.
and can worship with the church. I think it's like really, there's a hospitality,
Yeah.
I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That we can express.
For sure. And kids are getting more than you think they are.
They totally
They're
are.
paying way more attention. I mean, when we did the liturgy tour, those kids were like, wait, whoa, back it up.
Yeah.
You skipped a step.
While they're like coloring an icon, they're like, hold on, I got a question. I'm like, what? How are you doing this? 2 things at once.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Like, oh, you forgot to tell us about this chalice or this plate, or why do you hold it up this way, or why are there bells? And I mean, I remember you were like, okay, we got to move on. And they were like, wait,
Yeah.
you got to go back. You skipped a step.
Yeah. And then there's another side of this too that I think is important. That is, we can also, on the one hand, we want to extend hospitality to our kids and understand what's age appropriate for them.
Right.
I think that I'm going to go out on a limb. This is going to be like controversial, maybe even. I think that we oftentimes, we don't take our kids seriously enough.
Yeah.
So we think that they can't handle something, and so we don't require much of them, or that they can't understand complex things, and so sometimes we use age appropriate and hospitality as excuses to not invite our kids into growth, not to expect something out of them.
Right.
And I don't know why that'd be controversial, but I'm just saying, and our kids are super smart. They're smarter than you think. They know what's going on more than we think. And they're capable way more of more than we think. So we often, there's a sort of another downfall of underestimating what our kids are capable of.
Right.
That when you step into that space and actually expect your kids to like maybe sit up or stand for the creed,
Right.
or to make the sign of the cross, or to when the Holy Eucharist is being celebrated, to like pay attention. In schools, in their class, they are told to pay attention. I mean, there is much demanded of them. And I think sometimes as parents and in the church, we don't expect much out of them.
Yeah.
To their own detriment, and we don't take them seriously as human beings. And so like I guess there's a balance here, but maybe you could talk to it. Like there's a time for play, and we know that they're listening while they color, but how do we invite them? How do we take them more seriously too?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things is giving them the why behind why we're doing something, which is what I'm trying to do in the lessons that we teach. I'm trying to explain, why do we stand, or why do we sit here, or why do we kneel here? And not just because it's respectful, but there's actual reasons behind why we make these movements and why it's important for our bodies to be a part of the worship that we're experiencing. So I think having those why conversations at home can be really important.
Like, I mean, I'm imagining if I'm hearing you as a parent, like, I'm not going to explain all this to my kids in the middle of service.
But you can if you
can,
want
and
to.
be like, because this is, but sometimes with my kids, they'll be like, because it's important. Now get up, like pay attention. This is worth your attention. Sometimes those and we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
But talk about it later.
But actually go back.
Yeah.
Like I'm like thinking about even Michelle, like having a moment like that
God
with one
bless
of
her.
your kids, and her talking about how she was seeing this, like one of the kids not stand, even though she had asked them to stand several times. And so she like did what she could in the moment without getting, making it a big scene or a big deal. But then later she came back and sat down with that child and was like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what happened and why this is really important. And the reasoning behind standing. I think you can make things curious for your kids too. Like when the table's being prepared with Eucharist, like you can bend over and say things like, oh, look, do you see him like putting his hands up?
Right.
Like whisper to them.
I wonder what that means.
I wonder why he puts his hands up like that, or what are you thinking about right now? Or I'm thinking about, I'm visualizing Christ, or I'm like thinking back to Jesus doing with the 12 disciples and that kind of having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, totally. And even sharing like what it means to you. Like, wow, this is incredible. sometimes saying the simple thing out loud with your kid, like, I can't believe God loves us this much, will ring in their hearts. You know, I know my parents have said things like this to me, and they stick with me. So like sharing your own heart with your kids, and your own questions, like, I wonder why they do this, or man, that's so amazing, isn't it? I think it'd be such a huge contribution to that. And I mean, usually like the pastors' families have a lot of pressure to like be pastors' families. Our family is not that family at all. And my wife is such a shining example of, and by the way, she's like a single parent on Sunday.
Yeah. So
she's got 6 kids by herself, and usually our whole neighborhood sits together. So there's always a village, you know, there to support. And it's a beautiful picture of, like we got kids in every age trying to figure out what it means to be a Christian and to be in community and to worship together. And it's sort of a circus sometimes, and that's okay. And at the same time, we try to express to our kids that we're taking them seriously and that we expect something out of them, and some to join the community in its acts of worship and not just be somewhere else,
right,
completely checked out. So there's like that balance, and I think that's really helpful. I hope that parents hear this and get some ideas that would really apply to their kids, because every kid is also different. And when I talk to parents, I say, look, you know your kid better than anybody, sometimes better than your kid knows themselves, right? So none of this is meant to be given as just like, you know, objective, like applies to all homework or policy, but is, if any of our experiences and your heart and your vision for family ministry inspires or gives ideas for these parents, they should think how that would best work for them and their kids. Right. And enjoy the company of other parents trying to figure this out too. Like be in conversation with others. And can I say that they could even come and talk to you? Yeah, for sure. About, hey, what happened in the classroom, or here's what we're wrestling with in the service, or my kids are asking me these questions, or even like for new families, we've never done Advent. What should we be? Like all those questions are fair game. They can get a hold of you, right? Right. Oh yeah. And then they also, that gives, a lot of times that will give me ideas of where there are gaps. Right. And ways that we can actually help and serve them as families. That's awesome. So it takes a church, right, to raise kids. I'm so glad that we have you. Thanks. Our church has been waiting to have you in this role for a while, and even just a few months in, we are firing on all cylinders. It feels like we are like launching something really, really important, and it's good to be able to celebrate that and to share some of these stories with you guys, so that our whole church knows like some of what we're cooking and what we're looking forward to in the year ahead. Sort of my last question for you: what do you envision moving forward? What are some of the things that you look forward to being able to tackle in the future of family ministry? There goes the light again. I get it. Figure that out for future episodes. So for the future of family ministry, I'm thinking about we have a lot of questions about catechism and how we want to offer that and what we want that to look like. That's something that we are in as a staff are in conversations. So like about catechism, the process of teaching the basics of the faith, right, that leads to the sacrament of confirmation. For sure. Is that what you mean? Okay. Yes. Yeah. So what is that? What are some things that we know we want our littles almost we're creating, if I'm going to get my like education and curriculum and instruction brain out, creating a scope and sequence for our kids. And this is what a curriculum, and saying, these are lots of words I have I trust you. That we want the littles in the nursery, we want them to have learned about and really get these stories. And we want the middles to kind of learn about and get these stories. And we want the middle schoolers to have a certain number of classes that are going to teach them about something. So then in high school or middle school, when we're ready for confirmation, we know that a lot of this groundwork has already been laid for our kids. So that we have kids that get to a place of confirmation where the bishop comes, lays hands on them, and invites the Holy Spirit to fill them with gifts so that they could find their place among the ministers of the church, the priests of the church, that is the priesthood of all believers, taking their rightful place, right? As someone is saying, I believe, I own my faith, I've grown to this place of confirmation. And what's really important here is it's not just a box we're checking, like, well, just get through the class and check the thing. And
right.
I think in our church, I'm sensing that this is something that really is meaningful for you, for me, for our staff, for our kids. Like, and I know for our parents, what we really want to do is put the whole like power and effort of the church, our community, behind these kids, so that we give them the best opportunity, not only to experience the love of God and the community of God's people through a welcome, but also to be shaped in such a way that they encounter Jesus, the living Christ, and say to themselves, he's amazing.
Yeah.
I got to follow him.
Right.
Like he's brilliant. There's this sort of curiosity that clicks when you personally come in contact with him. And to be filled with the Spirit and then sent into the world as an agent of the kingdom of God, that's what we want. To do that it's no sequence of classes merely, right? It certainly involves that. But we want there to be like a compelling conviction and experience for these kids. And that cannot be done by you alone. It requires the whole church.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so I'm looking forward to that. I hope for this. I hear you saying that. I hope for the same thing. This is why it's such an important thing for us, because in a lot of ways we're planting the future church.
Yeah. Oh, we are.
And we have, of all the challenges we have, one of the challenges we do not have is not having enough kids.
Right.
We have a ton of kids, and that's a gift. And it's God's way, I think, in a lot of ways, saying, form the future church, form the church of tomorrow, and give these kids an experience of the love of God they can never forget.
Right.
That'll change their lives.
Oh, yeah. And that'll change their life. And too, like, of course, we want them to stay in the faith. And like, that's our number one goal. But also knowing that we don't have control over that.
Right.
Because they are individuals and they are their own people. But we are going to work as hard as we can to lay the foundation so that it's there. And so if they decide at some point to walk away from the faith, it's something that they won't be able to truly walk away from.
Sure.
It will always be in their head, and they will, will eventually come back. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and whether or not they do walk away from the faith, like so many do, I've even had seasons in my life where I was like, I'm done with this, right?
Right.
So it's not the end of the world. But also, even while we have them now, it sounds like what will be required of us is not only our loving intention, not coercive or heavy-handed, right? Because that's not at all how we do this. No disciple should be raised like that. But cultivating these spaces for people to wonder about God and encounter the living Christ and be filled with His Spirit, right? To be in communion with God and His people. That's what we want to create. But in that place and in the future, we're going to have faith.
Right. Yes.
That actually God is at work.
Yeah.
Even despite us and with us and ahead of us with these kids' lives. And something I tell myself all the time about my own kids when I worry about them or pray for them is God loves these kids so much more than I do.
Yeah.
And God is so much better than me and so much more powerful. Like, I can actually trust that He knows what He's doing.
Yeah.
And so I can be non-anxious, but still checked in and connected, right? And putting our best effort into this.
Yeah, and have faith that the Holy Spirit's going to do their job, and that it's not. We don't have to hold our kids in the faith,
like with a tight grip. Sure.
We can have a non-anxious, as much as we possibly can, loving approach to teaching and forming our kids.
I'm trying to land this podcast, but it just keeps getting interesting. What we're describing, what you just said, describes the way Jesus holds us.
Yeah.
Think of how many times in the Bible, I'm thinking of the rich young ruler who was curious, came to the Lord, had a question: how do I inherit eternal life? And he told them, he gave him an answer that ultimately turned him away. And Jesus didn't chase him down and grab him by the cloak or something. Right. Say, hold on, I got more. Don't leave. He let him go.
Yeah.
And we don't know the rest of his story, But what we do know is that Jesus looked on him with compassion because he knew him and he loved him, and that the Father and the Spirit are superintending the history of people's lives in ways that would blow our minds.
Yeah.
And in the end, he is reconciling all things to himself. How is he accomplishing all this? That's a great mystery, but we do know that that's the God we're serving.
Yeah.
So we're trying to hold our kids the way Jesus would hold our kids. Yeah. And that can be risky. Mm-hmm. We don't always get it right, but we're doing it within the context of a God who loves us and who is far more powerful to accomplish things greater than we can ask or imagine.
Right.
And we're not doing it alone. We have a community.
Right.
We have people, neighbors. Okay, I think we can land it.
We can land it.
This is so much fun. Thank you for spending time giving our church just a peek into family ministry. I hope this has been helpful for y'all. If you have any questions, and really I know what everyone's been waiting for is like, how do we sign up? How do we volunteer?
Oh, yeah.
Could you just answer that real quick? How do people raise their hand and say, I want to help?
You can send me an email and ask where we'll probably have another push in the next couple of weeks for people to sign up for the spring. We call it the spring, winter. For the winter, I'm stuck in school brain, so I'm thinking spring semester.
In Texas, it's either like we have no running water or electricity, and we're iced to death.
Yeah.
Or it's spring.
It's 100 degrees outside. And by spring, we mean a scorcher. Right. So we will be, in the next few weeks, we're going to be putting together the list of volunteers for starting in January. So we'll probably do another push where you can sign up with that QR code like we did in September.
Yeah.
So that will be a way that you can.
Where do they email you?
Sign up at melissag@resaustin.com.
And that's 1 L, 2 S's.
Yes.
Well,
it's on the website.
Yeah, it's definitely. So you could go to resaustin.com and go to our leadership up in the menu and find you, or you could go to family ministry. There's a few ways to do that. Or honestly, can we just say this? Go to Res Austin. There's a button. It's like, get connected.
Oh, yeah.
Just fill out any of the forms you find and be
sure.
like, I don't know where to find how to volunteer, but I want to volunteer. You could do that, and trust me, it all comes to the same place.
Oh, yeah.
We'll
you can talk to me on Sunday morning if you don't want to use technology. You can do that too.
Great. Cool. Okay, I think we've got that. Thanks for everything you do for our kids and our family. And on behalf of the church, thank you for the ways that you are thinking about raising our kids in the way of Jesus. That's a huge gift to so many people. And I know I'm saying on behalf of the whole Res family, thank you for giving your gifts to this. This is a really big deal. For generations to come, you're contributing to something really amazing.
Thank you.
And to all of our volunteers, if you're watching or listening, thank you for serving in family ministry. You are our heroes.
Yes.
I've had the opportunity to serve in those spaces, and it's amazing. Thank you for the work you're doing, for the risks you're taking, for being vulnerable with kids, for going out on a limb and teaching them about the faith. It is such a gift, and you are saints, and we're so grateful for it. So thank you for that. That's it. Let's land this thing. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to this week's follow-up. Peace.